My name is Isabella Carter, and at 29 years old, I was just 3 days away from marrying the man I believed was the love of my life, Adrian Whitmore. Our wedding was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful new chapter. The venue had been booked, the flowers ordered, and my dress was hanging in my apartment closet like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Everything seemed perfect until his wealthy parents ambushed me with a prenuptial agreement and an ultimatum. Sign it or the wedding is off. What they did not know was that behind my modest appearance lay something they never expected: $9 million, a thriving company, and a will stronger than they could ever imagine. They thought they could intimidate me into compliance, but they were about to learn that I was not the helpless outsider they assumed. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Albany, New York, the daughter of 2 dedicated public school teachers. We never had much, but what we did have was enough. My parents gave me books instead of jewels, and long conversations at the dinner table instead of vacations in Paris. They taught me the value of hard work, the importance of integrity, and the kind of grit that comes from earning every single step of your way. Money was always tight. I learned early to stretch a dollar, to live with purpose rather than extravagance. College seemed like a distant dream at first, but I made it real through endless late nights and perfect grades. Scholarships carried me through medical engineering at Johns Hopkins, where I buried myself in coding, algorithms, and sleepless hackathons. I did not just want to succeed. I needed to. The one person who cheered me on the loudest was my grandfather, Thomas Carter. He was a quiet man, a retired machinist with rough hands and a mind sharper than most professors I met. He believed in me when I doubted myself, and his encouragement never wavered. When he passed away during my final year at university, I thought I had lost not just my greatest supporter, but the foundation that had carried me through. Then came the shock. My grandfather, who had lived modestly his entire life, had spent decades quietly investing. He left me an estate worth $7 million. I remember staring at the lawyer in disbelief, unable to comprehend how the man who wore the same watch for 30 years had built such wealth. That inheritance became both my shield and my springboard. I invested most of it, careful and methodical, while using a portion to launch my medtech startup. By 27, the company was valued at nearly $2 million. Combined with my investments, my net worth climbed to $9 million, but no one would have guessed it. I drove a practical car, lived in a neat but simple apartment in Manhattan, and dressed with elegance but never excess. My wealth was my private secret, known only to my parents, my closest friend, and my attorney. I wanted to be loved for myself, not my bank account. I had no idea that in just 3 days, the Whitmores would force me to reveal everything I had hidden, and that their smug confidence would shatter in the process. I met Adrian Whitmore at a charity gala in Manhattan, one of those events where old money families paraded in designer gowns and tuxedos while cameras flashed. I had been invited because my company had donated a new medical software program to a children's hospital. To me, it was about giving back, honoring my parents' devotion to education and healthcare. To most others, it was about being seen. That's why Adrian stood out. Amid champagne glasses and hollow conversations, he approached me with a warmth that disarmed me instantly. He wasn't asking about my dress designer or my family connections. Instead, he wanted to know why I'd chosen pediatric healthcare as a focus for my software. When I explained, his eyes didn't glaze over like so many others. He listened. He asked thoughtful questions. Then, out of nowhere, he admitted he loved hiking in the Adirondacks and cooking overly spicy Thai food, 2 passions of mine. We laughed like old friends. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. I knew he was a Whitmore, one of Boston's oldest and most powerful families. But in that moment, he was just Adrian, genuine, curious, alive. Our first date was nothing like I expected. He took me to a tiny cafe tucked on a side street in Greenwich Village, where the owner greeted him like family. Adrian showed up without pretense, carrying a paper bag of pastries he'd picked up on the way. We sat for hours talking about everything from childhood embarrassments to our favorite books. There was no arrogance, No sense of superiority. For the first time, I thought maybe someone from his world could truly see someone from mine. But the deeper I stepped into Adrian's life, the clearer it became that his family did not share his openness. The Whitmores lived in a sprawling Cape Cod estate that looked like something out of a history book, complete with columns, sweeping lawns, and a driveway that seemed to stretch for miles. His parents, Richard and Margaret, were cordial at first meeting, but beneath their smiles was something sharper. His mother, in particular, had a way of making compliments feel like veiled insults. "So you studied at Johns Hopkins," she said over dinner that first night. "Quite impressive for a scholarship program, I imagine. How did you manage financially?" And his father, though less polished, was even more dismissive. He spoke mostly to Adrian about the stock market, politics, and acquaintances in Boston high society, rarely including me. Adrian didn't seem to notice. He was used to them, but I did. I felt the distance they were already creating, and though I brushed it off at the time, deep down I knew those subtle barbs were seeds that would grow into something far more poisonous. Adrian proposed on a chilly autumn evening, the kind of night where the leaves glowed like embers under the fading sun. We were on a sailboat in Cape Cod Bay, and as the breeze carried the scent of salt and pine, he slipped a velvet box from his pocket. Inside was his grandmother's ring, a sapphire framed by delicate diamonds. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't ostentatious. It was timeless. I said yes before he could even finish asking. At that moment, it felt like nothing in the world could separate us. The wedding planning began with laughter and dreams. I pictured a ceremony filled with joy, surrounded by the people who mattered most. But it didn't take long for Margaret Whitmore to tighten her grip. She had opinions about everything: the venue, the flowers, the guest list, even the kind of wine that should be served. "A Whitmore wedding must reflect Whitmore tradition," she declared more than once, her voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. At first, I went along with her suggestions. If she wanted to add 50 of her society friends to the guest list, fine. If she dismissed my idea for a jazz trio and insisted on a classical quartet, fine. I told myself these were small things compared to marrying Adrian. But then came the dress. That was one thing I would not surrender. I chose a sleek, modern gown that made me feel radiant, strong, and undeniably myself. When Margaret saw it, she gave a tight smile and said, "Oh, I see. Very economical. Practical, I suppose, for your background." The comment stung, but I swallowed my pride and walked away. It wasn't just her. Richard added his own brand of disdain. At one dinner, he leaned across the table and asked Adrian whether Isabella planned to keep tinkering with her little startup after marriage or devote herself to the household. My fork froze midair. Adrian brushed it off with a laugh, but I noticed how Richard didn't even look at me when he said it, as if my answer was irrelevant. Adrian tried to be the buffer. Sometimes he stood up to them, other times he gently urged me to compromise. "Pick your battles," he whispered after one particularly tense evening. And I did, over and over again. Still, something unsettled lingered beneath my excitement. In the quiet of night, I replayed Margaret's comments, Richard's dismissals, the way they made me feel like an outsider waiting for approval. I told myself love would be enough, that Adrian and I would build a life away from their shadow. But deep down, I sensed a storm was brewing. I just didn't know how soon it would break, or how devastating its impact would be. 3 days before the wedding, my phone rang. Margaret's voice was sugary sweet, a tone I had learned to distrust. "Isabella, dear, why don't you come by the house for tea this afternoon? Adrian will be busy, but I thought some one-on-one time would be lovely." Exhausted from final fittings and last-minute calls, I let myself hope that maybe this was her olive branch. Maybe she wanted to finally build a bridge between us before the wedding. I should have known better. When I arrived at the Whitmore estate, something felt wrong immediately. Instead of the sunlit garden room where Margaret usually held tea, the housekeeper led me into the formal library. Heavy drapes muted the afternoon light, and the air smelled faintly of leather and polish. Margaret was already seated in a rigid armchair, dressed in a burgundy suit that seemed chosen for intimidation rather than comfort. Beside her sat Richard, his expression sharp, his posture as stiff as the oak chair beneath him. On the table between them lay a thick leather portfolio. "Thank you for coming, Isabella," Margaret said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "We thought it best to settle some business matters before the wedding." Richard opened the portfolio and slid a document toward me. "This," he said curtly, "is a prenuptial agreement drafted by our family attorney. A simple formality, really. You'll need to sign it today." I blinked, my hands frozen in my lap. "Today?" Adrian never mentioned. "Adrian understands the necessity," Margaret interrupted smoothly. "Every Whitmore marriage has one. It protects the family legacy." I picked up the document, my heart pounding. As I scanned the dense paragraphs, my stomach turned. It was a trap disguised as a contract. In the event of divorce, I would walk away with nothing. No property, no earnings, not even protection for my intellectual property. There was even a clause that could give them partial rights over my medtech company. "This is one-sided," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the heat rising in my chest. Richard leaned back, lips curling into something between a smirk and a sneer. "It's standard. Surely you didn't expect to enter this family without safeguards. We've invested considerably in this wedding, after all." "And what about my assets?" I asked quietly. Margaret gave a light laugh, the sound grating. "Your little company? Charming, but hardly comparable." Something inside me snapped. I closed the document deliberately. "I'll need my attorney to review this." Richard's eyes hardened. "There's no time for that. You sign by tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, or the wedding is off." The ultimatum hit like a blade. I stood, clutching the prenup. "Then I'll discuss it with Adrian." As I turned to leave, Margaret's voice drifted after me, low and cutting. "She'll sign. Where else would she find a match like Adrian?" Richard's chuckle followed me out. I made it to my car before the tears came. They thought they had me cornered, but they had no idea what I was capable of. I drove home in a haze, the prenup lying on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. My phone buzzed with Adrian's name again and again, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed clarity before I faced him. I needed someone who understood power plays like this. At dawn the next morning, I called Daniel Rhodes, my grandfather's old attorney. He had guided me through the inheritance years earlier and was one of the few people who knew the full truth of my finances. "Meet me at my office, 7 a.m., I told him. "It's urgent." By the time Daniel arrived, immaculate in a navy suit, silver hair gleaming, my desk was buried in papers. The Whitmore prenup, my investment statements, my company's valuation. He took one look at me, then at the document, and his frown deepened. "3 days before the wedding?" he said, adjusting his glasses. "That's not just reckless, it's coercive." "Let me guess. They demanded a signature without independent counsel?" I slid the prenup toward him. "They gave me until 9 o'clock today." Daniel's eyes scanned the pages quickly, his expression tightening with every clause. Finally, he set it down with a sharp tap. "This is one of the most predatory agreements I've seen in 40 years. It strips you of everything, including potential rights to your own intellectual property. They didn't just underestimate you, Isabella. They tried to erase you." His words pierced the fog of humiliation that had clung to me since yesterday. "So what do we do?" I asked. Daniel leaned back, a slow smile tugging at his lips. "We don't play defense. We go on the offensive." He tapped my financial portfolio. "You're worth $9 million, Isabella. That makes you more than capable of protecting yourself. We draft a counter prenup, one that secures your company, your investments, and your independence. Balanced terms, fair division, equal footing." I exhaled slowly, relief mixing with determination. "And if they refuse?" "Then the Whitmores reveal themselves for what they are. You walk away with your fortune and your dignity intact. Either way, you win." For the next 2 hours, Daniel and I rewrote the narrative line by line. He added clauses protecting my business, language ensuring fair division of property, and safeguards that neither side could exploit. When he was done, the document wasn't a weapon, it was a shield. I stared at it, feeling my confidence return. For years, I had hidden my success, afraid of how people might treat me differently. But now, concealment was no longer protection. It was weakness. Margaret and Richard thought I was powerless. Adrian thought I was dependent. They were all about to learn that I had been holding the real power all along. By the afternoon, my decision was clear. I needed to face Adrian before the Whitmores. If we were to marry, he deserved the truth, not just about my finances, but about who I truly was. And I needed to know where he stood. I texted him to meet me at Harborview Bistro, a quiet restaurant overlooking the Cape Cod Marina where we had celebrated our first anniversary. When I arrived, I chose a corner table, the ocean shimmering through the window behind me. My heart raced as I arranged two folders on the table, one containing the Whitmore prenup, the other, Daniel's counterproposal, and my financial statements. Adrian walked in moments later, looking worn. His tie was loose, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. When he saw me, relief flashed across his face. "Isabella," he breathed, sliding into the chair opposite me. "I've been worried sick." I folded my hands, steadying my voice. "Your parents ambushed me with this." I slid the Whitmore prenup across the table. "Sign it or the wedding's off. Did you know?" His shoulders slumped. I knew about the prenup, but not the timing. I told them I would bring it up myself. They acted on their own. My throat tightened. "So you were going to ask me to sign this eventually, without telling me what it really meant?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I thought it was just standard language. I didn't read it carefully." "Then read Section 4, I said sharply. "It claims rights over any intellectual property created during the marriage. That includes my company." His brow furrowed as he scanned the clause, and I saw the shock settle over him. "I didn't know," he admitted. "This is extreme." "Extreme?" I leaned forward. "It's an erasure of me, Adrian, and your silence let it happen." He flinched at my words. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought it was a formality. My family has done this for generations." "Generations of control," I cut in, "and I won't be controlled. So here's the truth you've never asked about." I slid the second folder toward him. He opened it, and his eyes widened as he read. $7 million in investments. Your company valued at nearly $2 million? Isabella, you're worth $9 million, I finished. And I've kept it private because I wanted to be loved for me, not for my bank account. For a long moment, he stared at me, stunned. Then he looked up, torn between awe and hurt. "Why didn't you trust me with this?" "It wasn't about trust," I said softly. "It was about protection. From people like your parents, who assumed I had nothing." Adrian closed the folder slowly. His voice was low but steady. "Then let's protect both of us. Show them this. Together." That evening, Adrian and I arrived together at a private dining room in one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants. The place had been chosen carefully. Neutral ground, elegant, and public enough that no one could raise their voice without notice. My pulse hammered, but Adrian's hand in mine steadied me. We were seated when the doors finally opened. As predicted, Richard and Margaret arrived 15 minutes late, a calculated move to make us wait. Richard wore his usual charcoal suit, sharp as a blade. Margaret was draped in emerald silk, her diamonds flashing like weapons under the chandelier light. "Adrian, darling," Margaret cooed, brushing his cheek as if I weren't even there. "What a strange place for a simple signature." Richard's eyes flicked to the empty space in front of me. "I trust you've made the sensible decision, Isabella. Sign, and we can move forward with the wedding." I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened my leather portfolio and slid a different set of documents across the table. "We've reviewed your prenup," I said calmly. "It's unacceptable. Here is our counterproposal, fair, balanced, and protective of both families." Margaret's smile froze. "Counterproposal?" she repeated, as if the word were foreseen. Richard opened the folder, skimming quickly. His face darkened. "This wasn't the arrangement." "No," Adrian said firmly, his voice sharper than I had ever heard it with them. "The arrangement was coercion. 3 days before our wedding, You threatened to cancel everything unless Isabella signed away her rights. That ends now. Margaret's composure cracked. We were protecting you, protecting the Whitmore legacy. Surely you can't expect, What I expect, Adrian interrupted, is respect for the woman I'm marrying. I let the silence settle before placing my financial statements on top of the prenup. Perhaps you should understand exactly who you're dealing with. My current net worth is $9 million, $7 million in investments, and nearly $2 million in my company. For the first time, Margaret's mask zipped, her lips parted in disbelief, color rising in her cheeks. 9 million? Richard reached for the documents, scanning them with a lawyer's eye. His hands betrayed him, trembling slightly as he turned the pages. These appear legitimate, he muttered. Margaret's voice shook. You concealed this. Why? Would you have treated me differently if you knew? I asked, my gaze steady. Would you have welcomed me as an equal, or simply found another way to control me? Richard looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time without disdain. There was something new there, respect. This changes things, he said quietly. Then let it change everything, Adrian added. Because if you can't accept Isabella as my equal, then there will be no wedding. Margaret's diamond earrings caught the light as she stiffened, her authority slipping. For once, she had no words. The Whitmores left the restaurant shaken, their confidence cracked by the truth they hadn't seen coming. Richard had muttered something about having their lawyers review the new agreement. Margaret, for once, was silent. When the heavy doors closed behind them, Adrian exhaled like he had been holding his breath for years. They've underestimated you, he said, his hand finding mine under the table. But never again. The next afternoon, Richard called. Their attorneys had reviewed Daniel's counter-prenup. There were questions, of course, but no refusal. By evening, the documents were signed, balanced, binding, equal. 2 days later, as I stood in the bridal suite of a Boston hotel, the weight of the past week seemed to lift. My dress shimmered softly in the morning light, sleek and modern, the one I had chosen for myself. Jenna fussed with my veil while my mother whispered, "Confidence suits you, Isabella. You've stopped hiding." She was right. For years, I had cloaked my success, afraid it would draw the wrong kind of attention. But in facing the Whitmores, I had learned that silence only empowers those who want to diminish you. A soft knock interrupted us. When the door opened, Margaret entered. For the first time, she looked less like the imperious matriarch and more like a mother who had miscalculated. In her hands was a velvet box. "You make a beautiful bride," she said, her tone stripped of mockery. She opened the box to reveal a pair of antique pearl earrings. These belonged to Adrian's great-grandmother. She married into this family against great opposition and proved her worth in ways no one expected. I think you might understand her more than anyone. Her voice trembled on the last words. It wasn't a full apology, but it was something. A bridge. I accepted the earrings, my throat tight. "Thank you," I said softly. And for the first time, I meant it. The ceremony was breathtaking. When Adrian saw me walking down the aisle, the pride and love in his eyes silenced every lingering doubt. Our vows were steady, deliberate, and deeply personal, promises to face the world as equals, to build a partnership unshaken by outside influence. Later, as we danced under strings of golden lights, Adrian leaned close and whispered, "You've changed everything, Isabella. Not just for me, for all of us." Months later, his parents kept their distance, but with newfound respect. Richard even consulted me on a technology project for their firm. Margaret still guarded her pride, but she never again dismissed me as less than. Looking back, I realized the truth. Wealth isn't power, courage is. Standing firm when others underestimate you is the greatest inheritance you can ever claim. Sometimes the most powerful choice is refusing to be less than who you truly are.